Hello and welcome to this week's video blog. Now the title of today's video blog has been triggered by one of our viewers. I did write a week ago and say what should I record next week, and I got some really interesting replies, which was good. And the title of today's video blog is God-given relational connections. Bit of a mouthful. God-given relational connections, and in the first 60 seconds you'll know where this is going. It's November, it's 1970, I was 26 years old. I'd been baptised in the Spirit, Holy Spirit, on my bicycle, singing away and suddenly singing in tongues and saying things in tongues I'd never heard before. I shared this with my wife and 3 friends who met with us for Bible study, and they were all baptised in the Holy Spirit themselves. The churches in common in Surrey, which is where we lived, were liberal, Roman Catholic, and a fairly exclusive Brethren assembly, but some good people in it, which Anona and I were based in, even though we were somewhat frustrated. So our little group of 4 or 5 met for prayer, for Bible study, breaking bread. We sang from the Redemption hymnal because there were no recently written songs, they were yet to come. And it was informal and it was fun. And within 2 or 3 years, there were probably 30 to 40 of us. What we were doing was so unusual. Now everyone and his dog are doing it. Now around that time, an elderly lady heard about us and started to come along. It was quite odd because we were all young people and most of the church were younger than myself at the time. And as I say, I was 26. But she came along and she listened, was very polite, and one evening, in conversation with the whole group, she stated the reason that she was there was because some time back she'd received a dream or a vision of a fresh wave of God's Spirit, and announced to them all that I would be right at the head of this. So this somewhat took me aback, I must say. She had a friend in Sussex who lived in a very large house and let it out for small conferences. And this lady who lived nearby, she's buried in the cemetery just a few hundred yards from where I'm sitting, and she invited me with a friend at this 3-day retreat where the theologian and speaker Roger Forster was present, the author Arthur Wallace, the speaker and church leader John Noble, and also speaker Morris Smith and several others as well. There was talk of the gifts of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, unheard of outside of classic Pentecostalism, interoperational prophecy, apostles, prophets, and relational church. As the first day unfolded, I discovered we were fasting, but nobody had told us. I'd hardly missed a meal in my entire life. So I was not only hungry, but I was way out of my depth with all of these well-known speakers and writers and things that they were covering in terms of topics and so on. Unknown to me, this was the beginning of what was to be a soon flourishing house church movement, which at the time didn't exist. And it was very appealing to young people, and that house church movement grew into what we call today, or sociologists call, the new church movement. And it started about 2,000 brand new charismatic evangelical churches, and with many, many fine relationships as well. But its influence was out of all proportion to its size. In early 2000, Steve Clifford from our church was appointed leader of the Evangelical Alliance for a full 10 years. Again, unheard of. It was nearly always Anglicans. Anona and I were often at Lambeth Palace, invited by Archbishop George Carey, later Rowan Williams, and later Justin Welby. And at a Fresh Expressions of Church event in the palace itself, it was a royal palace, Justin told those present, about 200 people, if it weren't for Gerald Coates and his many friends and all they've achieved over the decades, Fresh Expressions of Church would not be happening in the Church of England. Roger Forster became my theological mentor. He drew my attention to the early years of a vibrant evangelical Methodism led by Charles and John Wesley, who coincidentally gave his last sermon here where I'm living in Leatherhead. And the gospel was at the heart of this movement. John Noble has become a valued advisor and is today in our Engaged Church again here in Leatherhead, and he lives nearby. And this long-term and other relationships were to have a huge influence and touch thousands of lives. Jesus really came for just 12 people. He shaped them into a relational team, or church if you like. He charged them to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And let me read you the words of Luke from the Acts of the Apostles, translated by Eugene Peterson, Acts chapter 1 and verse 12. And so they left the mountain called Olives and returned to Jerusalem. It was a little over half a mile, and they went to the upper room they'd been using as a meeting place. And that was Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James. And they agreed they were in this for good, together in prayer, women included, and also Jesus' mother, Mary, and his brothers. We should not forget that all those 12 apostles, with the exception of John, exiled on Patmos, working in the mines by day, sleeping in them by night, they were all martyred for their faith. 5 were crucified, 3 were stoned to death, 2 were speared to death, 1 was beheaded, and as I say, John was in exile. Why did they do it? Their wives lost husbands, the children, their father. Well, they'd been together with Christ for 3 years. They heard wisdom of the highest order, but then they witnessed what seemed to be the end, his crucifixion. 3 days later, they saw him raised from the dead and were afraid that Christ had been raised from the dead, but for them it was a mind-blowing experience. And then they saw him days later ascend into heaven on clouds. Some think it was the clouds of angels. Wherever you find clouds in the Bible, you'll find angels around nearby. And this supercharged them, not to build the kingdom, as sometimes we hear. Jesus said the kingdom is in you, the kingdom is around you, the kingdom is upon you. You can't build it, it's the church we build. No, it was to make Christ known, build the ecclesia, the church. And that's gone on for the last 2,000 years. And all because of God-given relational connections. That's why they're important. So look after your connections. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.